Okay, how many of you have ever actually had irrational fears of the dark growing up? Yeah, me too. When I was a kid, I remember in the basement, I was just convinced that there was a witch down in the basement. And so I remember running down the stairs real quick, grabbing whatever I need, run back up, and then turn off the light. Slam the door without looking back. And there was this one moment when I was about 7 years old that my sister and we went in the woods looking for bugs because, we're real rough and tumble girls. And we found this really cool one and we brought it home and we put it in a little bug cage. We were so proud of our little bug. And that night, though, I had forgotten about the bug. And apparently, it's one of those bugs that makes a lot of noise in the middle of the night. And so all of a sudden, I was jolted awake with this obnoxious sound. And I thought, like, what is this thing? Forgotten about the bug. And in my 7-year-old brain, this is what I came up with. I think there's a wolf sharpening a pencil in my room. Yeah, so ridiculous, right? I don't know what it was. Maybe it's being an artist. That's just where my imagination went. But this is what happens to us, is it not? That in the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the pain, we can't see the hand in front of our faces, let alone the bigger picture of what all of this is about. And it is totally understandable why little things like bugs might seem really scary to us. But could it be that God might want something more for us in the darkness than our fears would let us cave into? And this passage that we're going to look at today, Psalm 130, is the place that begins in the darkness. The psalmist begins this passage in the same vein of the place between the crucifixion and the resurrection, in holy, silent Saturday, where you sit in the tomb of the darkness with Jesus. It's where your prayers have been prayed but not yet answered. It's that moment of longing and waiting before the Lord for Him to do something new. And this passage begins this way. It says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy." This phrase, "out of the depths," here is the word Sheol, which was the ancient Near Eastern concept of hell. The psalmist is essentially saying, "Out of hell I cried to you, O Lord." Sheol was a place of chaos and darkness where fear and suffering abounded. And it is from this place that the psalmist cries out to the Lord. And he says, "If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you." The psalmist is saying this is a place of darkness as a result of sin, and it's not clear whether it's his sin or the sin of someone else or the broken world or just a result of the fall itself, that the sin in our world has reaped upon this place of chaos and hell that the psalmist finds himself. And he cries out to the Lord in the midst of that place, in the midst of the soil of suffering, and he acknowledges the darkness for what it is, that it's dark, and that it seems like there's no hope. He acknowledges his own helplessness to get himself out. He's saying, "God, I can't get myself out of this mess." And as we look at the world around us right now, I know many of us are feeling helpless, like, I can't get myself out of this. We can't get our world out of this. Only you, Lord. For with you, for it is forgiveness. So what do we do in this place? What do we do in the place between sowing and reaping, in the soil of suffering, in between the cross and the resurrection? I believe the psalmist gives us the key right here when he says next, "I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins." The context here is that of the Levite priests who would stand on the walls of the city and they would look out to the east. They would wait up all night in the midst of darkness, waiting for the dawn and the light to come. And when they did, when the dawn finally came, they could run then and go do the temple sacrifice, which was a sign of God's covenant mercy and forgiveness. And the psalmist would wait up for the Lord like that, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the longing, in the midst of the loss. In between the fall and the spring, between the crucifixion and the resurrection, in the tomb with Jesus, we are invited to wait for the Lord. And this word hope here in Psalm 130, when it says, "In his word I put my hope," is the word yakal, which literally means to wait expectantly. The psalmist is saying, I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I wait expectantly. You see, you don't wait for something that you aren't sure is coming. You don't pull an all-nighter waiting for the sunrise if you aren't sure that it's going to happen. You don't wait for a bus that isn't coming. God can be trusted, and that is why we can wait for him. And he says we can wait because we know who God is, that with him, the psalmist says, is full redemption. That means every area of your life where you have felt the stain and sin of death hit you personally or hit our world, God offers full redemption, complete, full, whether in this earth or in the one to come. That one day he will wipe every tear from our eyes and he will make all things new. And the things in this world that are ugly and broken and wrong and unjust, he will make right one day in the end. We know the end of the story, and so we can wait up with the psalmist in hope for how that it will end. Jesus has risen from the grave, and we can wait for him. We can wait for his kingdom to come in full. But what does it look like to wait expectantly? It's to stay awake in the midst of where confusion and fear and suffering abound and watch for the break of day. To stay awake in the pain and wait with our whole being. Instead of running from it, instead of fighting it, to stay awake and stay present in the midst of it and to cast our laments, as we talked about earlier. It's this image of, in the spring, looking at the soil and waiting for those crops to spring above the surface. Looking expectant and trusting that it will come. See, but the temptation is to fall asleep. It takes faith to wait for the dawn and to stay up all night. If you've ever pulled an all-nighter before, it takes perseverance. And around 3 a.m., you usually get a little bit loopy. And sometimes it's just so hard to just keep your eyes open and to keep trusting and to keep seeking the Lord for the dawn. But the Lord promises that it's worth the wait, because with him is full redemption. And what happens in us when we wait? I believe between sowing and reaping, the most significant growth happens under the soil in the waiting, where we cannot see, in our hearts, in the spiritual realm, in the ministry where God may be preparing us to receive the harvest. There was a time, as I mentioned in my series in the season of long sowing and tears, I had a prayer retreat with some staff, and I remember looking around and hearing from all the staff the stories of what God was doing on all these other campuses. God was really coming through at Grand Valley at the time. So many students were coming to faith. The ministry was growing, and it just seemed like everywhere else, things were going well. But I remember looking at the staff and sincerely just asking, when am I going to be done sowing in tears? Because I feel like this has been a long season, and I haven't seen any hope. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe you're asking, God, when am I going to be done? When is our world going to be done sowing in tears? And I remember in that season, Alicia DeCam, she was my supervisor at the time, and she came to visit me on campus, and we sat in Canley Chapel at Western Michigan University. And I just remember lamenting to her all of the losses and all of the things we had tried in the ministry and all of the failures and all of the students that had left. And it was just like, I don't know what to do. And God bless her, Alicia, instead of sort of, coming in there to try to fix it and be like, oh, let's try this strategy or let's try this one, she just paused and said, you know what, Betty, let's just ask the Lord, what are you doing in this season? Essentially, God, what are you doing under the soil where we cannot see? And we prayed this prayer, and thanks be to God, I heard this very profound word from the Lord that I want to share with you. And perhaps this is a word for you right now. The Lord was saying, Betty, I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. But the ground must be prepared to receive it. I'm causing you and your students to thirst, so that when I bring the stream rains and the rain, it won't be wasted on ungrateful hearts. I'm causing you to wait, to hunger, to thirst, so that you will drink in my rain when it comes, and it will yield fruit. This is not about you and your accomplishments. I'm stripping you of your independence and fear of not meeting human goals, so that my provision will be seen as truly mine and not yours. Whew. See, in the waiting, the Lord wanted to remind me that ministry doesn't rise or fall on my ability or my inability, on my action or inaction. I learned more deeply in that season how to let go of trying to fix things and achieve my way out of a situation, and how feeble my attempts are at producing growth. I learned how desperately dependent I am on God to produce change. I was humbled to see that indeed, no matter our efforts, as 2 Corinthians says, neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. It is only God who makes things grow. And what happens in us in the waiting for that growth is that the shell falls off and gives way to the growing plant within. You see, my shell of self-dependence and pride, my false self, needed to be cracked open and exposed so that when I grew from the Lord's resources and not my own. You see, in the waiting, we let go of all other messiahs that we cling to in order to save us. The people around us, the structures, our systems, our training, and ways of doing ministry. In the barren winter months, those things sometimes don't produce fruit. And we find that by themselves, they're meaningless. And so we let go. And the shell falls off. The shell, our false self, dependent on these other things, falls off. And in the waiting, the illusion of control is gone. I can't get out of the pit on my own. And so I turn to the only one who can help me. This ministry, our world, cannot get out of the pit on its own. And so we surrender to the only one who can produce growth and new life. You see, in the waiting, we learn how to trade self-dependence for God dependence. And we grow into His resources and His power instead of our own. In the waiting, I learned what grace looks like lived out. That I could just sit in the hole of disappointment with Jesus and failure and seek Him more as the giver than the gift. And as I did, He made me new. And I believe when we seek the Lord and depend on Him alone, we start to rise out of our shell by trusting in His identity for us. His resources, His resurrection power that starts to take root, founded on the cross and the resurrection, not on our achievements, but on Him. And what else happens in the waiting is that our roots grow and search for water and search for light. Did you know that desert plants actually have the deepest roots because they are forced to go down deeper and search for water? And this is what happens to us in the waiting, is it not? When we cry out to God, God, where are you? Where are you? Why? God, where are you? When will you come through? How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord? Why? This is where we grow our roots in perseverance and seeking God for water as we grow deep in Him. And then as we grow up in search for light, we become more of the fullness of who we were created to be, and we grow roots. It's what grows as we persist in faithfulness regardless of the outcome. It's what takes root when you continue in obedience to God and continue to seek Him, even when everything around you is screaming that it's not worth the sacrifice. It's what's cultivated in the soil when you have waited and prayed and hoped for God to come through. When you don't see your prayers answered right away, but you keep praying anyway and you keep seeking and trusting Him anyway. Perseverance, character, patience, long suffering, and even joy that grows in the waiting. You won't realize it until later when the harvest finally does come, that you're a little stronger, a little more resilient, and a little more ready to journey the storms ahead. The roots we grow in search for water and light become strong and massive, and they create us to be a new creation. And we can persevere in the waiting for God, because with the dawn is worth the wait. With the dawn is full redemption and unfailing love, which means every area of your life where you have tasted the sin and sting of death in your life or in our world, God offers full redemption. Love that never fails. Unfailing love, the text says. Love that never gives up. Love that continues and persists with us in the darkness. Love that offers life and healing. He will redeem, and one day has promised that He will wipe every tear from our eye. And not just physical healing, but spiritual and emotional as well. And it might look different than we expect. And it might not come in the time that we want it to. But can we trust in the one who brings full redemption and His time and is His way? And then no matter what we see on the surface, whether it's a raging winter storm or a desolate desert, can we trust that God is working behind the scenes under the soil? Can we stay awake in the pain long enough to see the dawn when it comes? Because I believe when we do, we will take in the sunrise more than any sleeper could ever appreciate. We will see the dark shadows turn into lush green landscapes before our eyes under a brilliant dawn. My invitation to you in this season is to continue to wait, continue to seek Him, continue to trust Him in the waiting, in the dark months, because that is where you grow your roots, to be ready for what is the harvest ahead and the storms that may come. So I want you in this time to take a moment with the Lord and ask Him, just like my friend and I did together, Jesus, what are you doing under the soil? What are you doing where I cannot see? How are you growing me? How are you growing this ministry? How are you preparing our world for the harvest? Help us to stay awake and present with you to wait for its coming. Let me pray for us. Jesus, I thank you that you promised to come, that full redemption is in store for those who wait for you. So help us to stay awake, Lord. Help us to stay present with you in the midst of the darkness and to cling to you alone for hope. Help my friends here to wait and trust in your unfailing love. Amen.